December 17th, 1944. A biting cold seeped into every fibre of a soldier's uniform outside Iwela, Belgium. The kind of cold that steals your breath and numbs your resolve. A military policeman, Sergeant William Creel, stamped his feet, watching a jeep approach, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. 3 figures sat inside, bundled against the frost, their American uniforms appearing authentic enough, their M1 Garans and helmets seemingly regulation. They spoke English too, with a passable cadence. Everything looked right, sounded right. But something felt profoundly, unsettlingly wrong. Creel had been living under a shadow of a whisper, a rumor so outrageous it bordered on madness. German soldiers, operating behind Allied lines, dressed as Americans, speaking American words, sowing discord and chaos. It was a betrayal of the fundamental rules of engagement, a psychological assault far more insidious than any bullet or bomb. This wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about the chilling realization that the enemy could be anyone, anywhere, indistinguishable from your comrades. It was the ultimate test of trust in a world already stripped bare of certainty. So, Creel raised his hand, a silent command for the jeep to halt. His breath plumed in the frigid air. He asked for the password, a simple question, a routine formality. But the men in the jeep hesitated. Their eyes darted, a flicker of uncertainty. He asked again, more firmly. Their English, previously so convincing, now faltered, a carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under pressure. And then, a detail, small but damning, caught Creel's trained eye. Sten guns. British submachine guns. No American patrol would carry those. In that instant, the illusion shattered. These weren't GIs, they were infiltrators. Within minutes, the 3 men were in custody, their American olive drab peeled back to reveal German field grey underneath. Untitier Manfred Perus, Oberfenrig Gunther Billing, and Geiter Wilhelm Schmidt had just been unmasked, becoming the first infamous prisoners of what would soon be known as the Battle of the Bulge. Their capture, seemingly a minor incident in the grand tapestry of a massive offensive, would ignite a firestorm of paranoia, transforming the very nature of Allied security and leaving an indelible mark on military history. What these 3 men, shivering in the Belgian cold, couldn't possibly have known was the seismic wave their unmasking would send through the Allied High Command. It wasn't merely the capture of a few enemy soldiers, it was the chilling confirmation of a new, terrifying dimension to the conflict. This was a systematic campaign of cultural interrogation, an absurd yet profoundly effective quiz show designed to ferret out imposters. Every checkpoint, every casual conversation, every interaction became a pop quiz on American identity. The tools of detection weren't codes or ciphers, but the most mundane aspects of American life. Baseball statistics, state capitals, Hollywood gossip, and the names of cartoon characters. It was a realization that true identity wasn't just about a uniform or a language, but about an entire lived experience, a shared cultural fabric that was surprisingly difficult to fake. The genesis of this audacious deception can be traced back to October 22nd, 1944. Deep within his Rastenburg headquarters in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler, increasingly desperate, summoned one of his most trusted and fearsome commandos, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny was a legend, a man whose exploits had already earned him a place in the pantheon of daring wartime operations. This wasn't just a soldier, this was a showman of sabotage, a master of the impossible. Imagine Skorzeny standing before Hitler. The Führer, known for his erratic moods and grandiose schemes, laid out a vision that would reshape the final months of the war, a mission requiring deception on a scale never before attempted. Skorzeny already had a formidable reputation. In September 1943, he had orchestrated the daring glider assault that liberated Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison at Gran Sasso, spiriting the Italian dictator away in a light plane that barely cleared the rocky plateau. A year later, in October 1944, he had masterminded the kidnapping of Miklos Horthy Jr., forcing Hungary's regent to resign and keeping that nation clinging to the Axis alliance. Skorzeny wasn't just a commando, he was a strategic weapon, a man who could turn the tide of political and military events through sheer audacity and brilliant execution. Now, Hitler presented him with his most audacious assignment yet. German forces were preparing for a massive counteroffensive, a desperate gamble through the Ardennes forest. The objective was Antwerp, a crucial port whose capture would split the American and British armies, recreating the stunning success of May 1940 when German panzers had blitzed through to the English Channel. But this time, success hinged entirely on speed. The Germans needed to capture at least one bridge over the Meuse River intact, preventing Allied engineers from destroying them and buying precious time. Skorzeny's task was to form a special brigade, Panzer Brigade 150, with the sole purpose of seizing those bridges before they could be blown. But then, Hitler revealed a detail that made even the hardened commando pause, a decision that twisted the conventional rules of warfare into a dangerous knot. This could be accomplished faster, and with fewer losses, Hitler explained, if Skorzeny and his men wore American and British uniforms. Small units, disguised in enemy clothing, could cause tremendous confusion, upsetting communications, misdirecting troops, spreading panic. Skorzeny, a man intimately familiar with the brutal realities of war, listened with a cold understanding of the implications. International law, specifically the Hague Convention of 1907, was unequivocally clear. Soldiers captured while wearing enemy uniforms, particularly when engaging in military operations, forfeited their rights as prisoners of war. They could be executed as spies. This wasn't merely a tactical gambit, it was a life-or-death proposition, a legal minefield. This possibility sparked extensive, heated discussions within the German High Command, involving figures like General Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Hitler, however, was adamant, assuring Skorzeny that the tactic was legitimate, provided his men removed their Allied uniforms before engaging in actual combat. A fine line indeed, and one fraught with deadly peril. Within days, Skorzeny, ever the pragmatist, despite the legal and moral tightrope, submitted his plans to Jodl. He requested 3,300 men with a solid grasp of English and, crucially, American dialect. On October the 25th, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command, issued an order to every headquarters on the Western Front, requesting English-speaking volunteers for secret commando operations. The order, signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, explicitly sought soldiers with fluency in the English language and knowledge of American idiom. Skorzeny knew this broadcast request was a double-edged sword. It would undoubtedly reach Allied intelligence within days. He sought permission to cancel the entire operation, understanding the immense risk of forewarning the enemy. But Hitler, in his characteristic stubbornness and increasingly detached view of reality, denied the request. As predicted, the Allies intercepted the order on November 30th. Yet, in a testament to the sheer audacity of the German plan, Allied intelligence officers dismissed it. They simply couldn't believe the Germans would be so brazen, so openly announce a plan that violated the basic tenets of warfare. This underestimation, this failure of imagination, would prove costly. Volunteers arrived from every branch of the German military, many having no idea what they had truly signed up for. Take Fritz Priest, for instance, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator. He envisioned a role far from the front lines, perhaps interrogating American prisoners. Instead, he found himself isolated behind barbed wire at a clandestine training camp established at Grafenwöhr in eastern Bavaria. Security was extreme, an indicator of the mission's paramount importance and the horrific consequences of its failure. One man was shot dead when a letter he wrote home contained too much detail, a stark, brutal reminder of the stakes. The volunteers discovered their true mission only after arrival, a chilling revelation that must have sent shivers down their spines. The reality of what Skorzeny had to work with would have been comical if the stakes hadn't been so astronomically high. Of the approximately 2,500 men eventually assembled, only a mere 10 spoke perfect English with a nuanced understanding of American idioms. Another 30 to 40 spoke English well enough, but crucially had no grasp whatsoever of American slang, the subtle linguistic markers that defined a true American. A slightly larger group, between 120 and 150, spoke English moderately well. The vast remainder, they had only school-level English, barely able to string together more than a yes or no. Skorzeny himself later wrote, with a touch of dark humor, that after a couple of weeks, the result was terrifying. Those with minimal English were given an almost absurd instruction. If approached by Americans, they were to exclaim, "Sorry," then open their trousers and hurry off, feigning diarrhea. A strategy that, while desperate, speaks volumes about the impossible task they faced. The equipment situation proved equally desperate, bordering on farcical. OB West, the German Army High Command West, was tasked with procuring an ambitious list of Allied hardware: 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and a sufficient quantity of British and American uniforms. The delivery, predictably, fell catastrophically short of requirements. Only 2 Sherman tanks arrived, both in poor condition, with one breaking down almost immediately. Instead of American armor, Skorzeny received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armored cars, 6 armored personnel carriers, and 5 Sturmtiger assault guns, all distinctly German. The Panthers were given a crude disguise: sheet metal cladding, a coat of olive drab paint, and hastily applied white star insignia. Skorzeny, with his characteristic honesty, admitted they would fool only very young American troops, seeing them from very far away at night. The uniform situation was even worse. Many were British, Polish, or Russian, not American. Some were summer-issue uniforms, utterly unsuitable for a December offensive in the frozen Ardennes. Others bore bloodstains or P markings, indicating they had been taken from prisoners of war, a blatant giveaway to any discerning eye. Units across Germany, confused by the vague request, simply sent whatever they could find. The brigade was flooded with Polish and Russian equipment from units that had no understanding of the operation's true purpose. Ultimately, Skorzeny managed to acquire enough authentic American uniforms and weapons for only his most critical commando teams, the elite, the few who stood any chance of passing. These best English speakers were formed into a special unit designated Einheit, named after SS Captain Ernst Elo, who would lead them. Despite the brutally compressed timeline, these teams received intensive, focused training. They delved deep into the intricacies of the American Army, learning badges of rank, military customs, drill procedures, even the subtle nuances of American body language. Some were sent to POW camps at Kustrin and Landsberg, not to interrogate, but to practice their English with captured American soldiers, observing their mannerisms, listening to their natural speech patterns. They watched American movies, not for entertainment, but to perfect accents and learn current slang. They memorized American brand names, sports teams, popular songs, Hollywood stars, the very fabric of American popular culture. The commandos practiced walking like Americans, smoking like Americans, even chewing gum like Americans, a desperate attempt to embody an identity that was profoundly alien to them. Their missions were categorized into three distinct, equally dangerous objectives. Demolition squads, comprising 5 to 6 men, were tasked with destroying bridges, ammunition dumps, and vital fuel stores. Reconnaissance patrols, smaller units of 3 to 4 men, would scout both sides of the Meuse River, disseminating false orders to unsuspecting American units, reversing road signs, removing minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with warnings of non-existent mines. Pure psychological warfare designed to paralyze movement. The lead commando units, working in tandem with the attacking German forces, would cut telephone wires, destroy radio stations, and issue false orders aiming to blind and confuse the enemy at the most critical juncture. These commandos knew the risks intimately. If captured in American uniform, execution was virtually certain under international law. But there was an even more chilling danger. In the chaos of battle, they might be shot by their own side if German troops mistook them for actual Americans. To mitigate this, they devised specific identification signals. Vehicles would display a small yellow triangle. Tanks would maintain specific gun positions, and soldiers would wear colored scarves beneath their uniforms. Fragile safeguards in the face of absolute chaos. On December the 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 assembled near Bad Münstereifel, a patchwork force of deception and desperation. On the afternoon of December 16th, they moved out, advancing stealthily behind 3 attacking panzer divisions. The plan was audacious. Once the spearhead divisions reached the vital high ground, Skorzeni's disguised forces would then move around them, racing ahead to capture the undefended Meuse bridges. The entire operation, codenamed Greif, Griffin, hinged on the lightning-fast advance of the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by the notorious Joachim Peiper. If Peiper's armoured spearhead broke through quickly, Skorzeni's disguised troops could slip through the ensuing confusion, reach the bridges, and secure them before American engineers had a chance to destroy them. It was a gamble of epic proportions, betting everything on a swift, overwhelming German success. December 16, 1944, dawned before light, cloaked in the deep, silent forests of the Ardennes. More than 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, launched Hitler's last great offensive in the West. The initial assault achieved complete, devastating surprise. American forces, thinly spread across an 80-mile front, were woefully unprepared, facing overwhelming numbers. 4 inexperienced or battle-weary American divisions found themselves confronting 30 German divisions. The German artillery barrage shattered the frozen morning, its roar echoing through the ancient woods. Searchlights, bouncing off low, heavy clouds, eerily illuminated the battlefield. Infantry advanced through snow-covered forests, their breath smoking. Panzers rumbled forward on narrow, icy roads, their tracks chewing up the frozen earth. For the first few hours, everything miraculously proceeded according to plan. In the midst of this early chaos, the Einheit teams, Skorzeni's meticulously trained infiltrators, slipped through. Dressed in American uniforms, driving captured jeeps, they blended into the maelstrom of the American withdrawal. One team, with incredible nerve, drove directly into an American-held town, brazenly scouting its defenses, before, on their way out, redirecting an American convoy of armor and supplies down the wrong road. Another 2 teams successfully misdirected Allied convoys, further escalating the general confusion. They cut telephone wires, removed crucial road signs, and spread false rumors of German breakthroughs far deeper than actual penetrations. It was a testament to the effectiveness of their deception, causing exactly the kind of panic and disarray Hitler had envisioned. But then, on December 17th, the brutal hammer of reality descended, utterly destroying the operation's prospects. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Peiper's armoured spearhead, failed to reach its objectives on schedule. Fierce, unexpected American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge, denied the Germans the critical northern roads they desperately needed. At St. Vith, American defenders fought with astonishing ferocity, delaying the entire German timetable by nearly a week. The rapid breakthrough that Operation Greif required, the swift, decisive advance upon which everything hinged, never materialized. Skorzeny, always a clear-eyed strategist, realized that very same day that his mission's original aims were doomed. He attended a staff conference at the 6th Panzer Army headquarters and, with a heavy heart, suggested his brigade be used as a conventional unit, their specialized deception now rendered moot. The request was approved. Panzer Brigade 150, the spearhead of psychological warfare, was ordered to assemble south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division, relegated to the brutal, grinding attrition of conventional combat. But the commando teams, the Einheit Infiltrators, were already behind American lines, isolated, committed. Some, against all odds, managed to successfully complete their specific missions, sowing localized confusion and disruption. Others, however, were captured. They were caught when they failed the crucial password challenges, when nervous American soldiers noticed telltale British weapons or distinctly German boots, when their carefully rehearsed English failed under the immense pressure of interrogation, or, most ironically, when they simply couldn't answer the most basic questions about American culture. The capture of Peru's Billing and Schmidt near Iwela on December the 17th, that initial, seemingly small incident, was the spark. It created a wildfire of panic that would ultimately define the operation's true lasting impact. During their interrogation, Wilhelm Schmidt made a statement that electrified Allied intelligence, sending shockwaves through the command structure. He claimed their mission was part of a much larger operation, an audacious plot to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, and capture or even kill General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt genuinely believed this rumor, or if he was shrewdly spreading deliberate disinformation, remains a historical mystery. No concrete evidence has ever surfaced to confirm such a plan existed. The actual mission, as we know, was to capture bridges over the Meuse River. Yet the statement, true or not, had immediate and dramatic consequences. Within hours, security around Eisenhower was dramatically increased. The Supreme Commander, the architect of the Allied invasion, found himself virtually imprisoned in his headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by layers of guards who meticulously checked everyone entering the building, even his closest aides. Eisenhower, a man of action and outdoor pursuits, was reportedly furious at this confinement, especially when it extended through Christmas. After several days, his frustration boiling over, he angrily declared that he had to get out and didn't care if anyone tried to kill him. Such was the claustrophobia of suspicion, the erosion of trust that extended even to the very top. But the paranoia, like a rapidly spreading virus, metastasized far beyond protecting Eisenhower. Allied forces, already reeling from the ferocity and surprise of the German offensive, now saw potential infiltrators everywhere. Checkpoints, once sparse, sprang up like mushrooms throughout the entire Allied rear areas, creating immense bottlenecks and greatly slowing the crucial movement of troops and supplies. American military policemen, suddenly thrust into the role of cultural gatekeepers, began improvising interrogations, using questions explicitly designed to identify Germans posing as Americans. Imagine the scene at these hastily erected checkpoints. A freezing, exhausted American soldier, perhaps a truck driver or a private on leave, pulls up to a barrier. An MP, equally cold and equally on edge, peers into the cab, his rifle held ready. "What's the capital of Illinois?" he barks. Or, "Who won the World Series in 1940? Or, "Who's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend?" Even more absurdly, "What team plays at Wrigley Field?" "Who's married to Betty Grable?" "Where does the guard stand in a football formation?" "Who is Frank Sinatra?" "What's the name of the president's dog?" The questions spanned a baffling spectrum, from state geography to obscure baseball statistics, from Hollywood gossip to the nuances of American slang. MPs improvised constantly, inventing new questions based on whatever random American trivia they could conjure. The system, though chaotic and often absurd, was born of necessity, and it created numerous, often hilarious problems for genuine American soldiers. Regional differences meant that a soldier from, say, Texas might have no knowledge of a minor league baseball team in the Midwest, or a popular Hollywood couple from California. Educational disparities meant some Americans simply never learned state capitals or followed baseball. Many genuine Americans, through no fault of their own, failed these impromptu cultural quizzes. The stories are legion and highlight the sheer lunacy of the situation. General Omar Bradley, a towering figure in the Allied command, was famously detained when he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois. The MP, perhaps a Chicago native, mistakenly believed it was Chicago and held Bradley until his identity could be painstakingly verified. Brigadier General Bruce Clark, another senior officer, was held at gunpoint after incorrectly stating that the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. A captain, simply for wearing a pair of German boots he'd taken as souvenirs, a common practice at the time, spent a week in detention under suspicion of being an infiltrator. British soldiers faced particular difficulties. When reconnaissance officer David Niven, yes, that, David Niven, the future Hollywood star, encountered a guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series, he could only reply with characteristic British understatement that he hadn't the faintest idea. British troops, whose cultural frame of reference was entirely different, who knew nothing of American sports or geography, were routinely detained until their identities could be verified through other, more reliable means. Some American soldiers, infuriated by the absurdity of the interrogations, deliberately gave wrong answers as a form of protest, only to find themselves detained. Others became angry at being questioned by junior enlisted men, creating tense confrontations that further slowed movement and frayed nerves. The paranoia, in short, affected military operations significantly, far beyond the tactical impact of Scorzini's actual infiltrators. Troop movements that should have taken mere hours now required days, as every vehicle was stopped, every occupant questioned, their identities cross-checked against a litany of cultural minutiae. Supply convoys, vital arteries of war, sat idle at checkpoints for agonizing stretches while drivers desperately attempted to prove their American identity. Units rushing to reinforce threatened sectors, where the fighting was desperate and every minute counted, were delayed by repeated, frustrating interrogations. Commanders found their orders questioned by subordinates whose trust had been eroded to the point where they suspected everyone, even their superiors, might be a German infiltrator. The psychological impact on the German infiltrators themselves was severe, almost crippling. Those few who were still behind American lines found their carefully planned movements paralyzed. The cultural questions, the spontaneous demands for trivia, brutally exposed the inadequacies of their preparations. They had diligently studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, memorized American Army organization charts. But they had not anticipated, could not have anticipated, interrogations about baseball statistics, Hollywood marriages, or regional slang. These were not facts to be memorized. They were deeply ingrained cultural touchstones absorbed over a lifetime. Some infiltrators attempted to avoid checkpoints entirely, resorting to traveling cross-country or through dense forests, making them even more conspicuous to American patrols already on high alert. Others tried to bluff their way through checkpoints, offering increasingly flimsy excuses for why they couldn't answer the questions. Few succeeded. Between December the 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 members of Operation Greif. 16 of these were captured in December 1944 alone. The team leader, Georg Schultz was captured later, in May 1945. Each captured infiltrator, once identified, faced a military trial. The legal situation was stark and uncompromising under international law. Article 23 of the Hague Convention concerning land warfare specifically forbade the improper use of a flag of truce or of the national flag or of the military insignia and uniform of the enemy, as well as of the distinctive badges of the Geneva Convention. Soldiers captured while wearing enemy uniforms and conducting military operations could be tried as spies, rather than being afforded the rights and protections of prisoners of war. This distinction was crucial and deadly. The first trial began at Henri Chapelle on December 21st. Perouse, Billing and Schmidt, the trio captured days earlier, faced charges of violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They had been captured in American uniforms, armed with American weapons, carrying what appeared to be American identification, but underneath they wore their distinctive German field grey. The trial was swift, a stark reflection of wartime expediency. All three were convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December the 23rd, 1944, just 2 days before Christmas, the sentences were carried out. American military police led the three Germans to the execution site. Captain J. Iser of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station pinned white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses were removed. The prisoners were blindfolded, a final curtain on their desperate deception. As the military police formed the firing squad, Billing, a convinced Nazi to his final moment, reportedly shouted, "Long live our Führer Adolf Hitler!" At the moment of execution, the rifles fired. All three men died instantly. Their bodies were cut down, carried away, and buried. Eventually they would be interred at the German military cemetery at Lommel, Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 other German war dead. 13 additional Operation Greif participants faced similar fates, tried and executed at either Henri Chapelle or Huy between December 21st and December 31st. Wilhelm Wiesenfeld, Manfred Brony, Hans Reich, Arno Kroer, Günther Schulz, Erhard Miegel, Horst Gerbig, Norbert Pollack, Ralph Benjamin Meer, Hans Witzuk, Otto Stoer, Alfred Franz, and Anton Moruk all faced firing squads. Each execution followed a military trial. Each trial found the defendants guilty of violating the Hague Convention. Each sentence was reviewed and approved by senior commanders. The executions were carried out with military precision, without malice, but crucially, without mercy. Team leader Georg Schultz was tried by military commission in May 1945 and executed near Bruges on June the 14th. Why his trial was delayed until after Germany's surrender remains unclear, and who ultimately ordered his execution also remains uncertain. The United States Ninth Army carried out the sentence. In total, 17 Operation Greif participants were executed for wearing enemy uniforms. The operation's tactical accomplishments were, in the cold light of history, minimal. No bridges were captured, no major demolitions succeeded, no critical communications were permanently disrupted. A few road signs were reversed, some telephone lines were cut. Several American units received false orders, though most were quickly corrected as the wider situation clarified. In terms of tangible strategic gains, Greif was a comprehensive failure, but the psychological impact vastly exceeded any tactical results. For weeks, American forces operated under the chilling assumption that German infiltrators might be anywhere, hiding in plain sight. This pervasive paranoia affected decision-making at every level. Eisenhower's confinement meant the Supreme Commander was isolated from direct observation of battlefield conditions during the critical opening phase of the offensive, a period when his leadership and insight were most needed. The relentless checkpoint delays slowed the American response to the German penetration, a potentially catastrophic consequence. Units that should have reached threatened sectors in hours took days to arrive, their advance crippled not by enemy fire, but by internal suspicion. The widespread suspicion degraded unit cohesion, a vital element of military effectiveness. American soldiers who should have been singularly focused on fighting the Germans to their front instead worried about possible Germans among them, creating an insidious enemy within. The Battle of the Bulge itself, a brutal, desperate struggle, proceeded largely independent of Operation Greif's tactical failure. German forces drove deep into American lines, creating the iconic bulge that gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, American defenders, surrounded and outnumbered, held out with legendary defiance. On December 22nd, when German officers delivered a surrender ultimatum, the acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, responded with a single, typewritten word that became legendary: nuts. When the confused German officers asked what it meant, they were told it was the American equivalent of "go to hell." The 101st Airborne held Bastogne until relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December 26th, his forces having executed a remarkable 90-degree turn to break the siege. By early January, Allied counterattacks had eliminated the Bulge and restored the front lines. The battle raged from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. More than 1 million men participated, making it the largest battle fought by the United States Army outside the Civil War. American casualties exceeded 80,000, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured. German casualties were similar, but for Germany, these losses were irreplaceable. The battle marked the unequivocal end of Germany's ability to conduct offensive operations in the West. Hitler had gambled everything on the Ardennes offensive, his last desperate roll of the dice, and he had lost. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif was effectively over by December 17th, when Panzer Brigade 150 converted to conventional operations. On December 21st, the brigade attempted to capture Malmedy, but was repulsed after several costly assaults. Skorzeny himself was wounded by artillery shrapnel near Lineville. He recovered and continued serving until Germany's surrender in May 1945, when he surrendered to the 30th Infantry Regiment. He spent 2 years in custody, awaiting trial. At the Dachau trials in 1947, Skorzeny and 9 officers of Panzer Brigade 150 faced charges, improperly using American uniforms by entering combat disguised, treacherously firing upon American forces, and wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from POW camps. Skorzeny's defense rested on a crucial, subtle distinction. His men, he argued, had been explicitly ordered to remove their American uniforms before engaging in actual combat. The disguises, he maintained, were solely for infiltration and deception, a legitimate ruse de guerre, not for fighting under false colors. A surprise defense witness proved decisive. FFE Yo Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive agent, testified that Allied forces had used identical tactics. He had personally worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France. The military tribunal, grappling with the nuanced interpretations of international law, drew a clear distinction between using enemy uniforms during combat and using them purely for deception. It could not be definitively proven that Skorzeny had ordered his men to fight while wearing American uniforms. The tribunal, controversially, acquitted all defendants. The verdict ignited a firestorm of debate. 17 of Skorzeny's men had been executed for actions that, on the surface, seemed identical to those for which he was acquitted. The difference, it appeared, boiled down to timing and evidence. The men executed in December 1944 had been captured in American uniforms, caught red-handed. Skorzeny, tried in 1947, years after the fact, could demonstrate that his orders explicitly prohibited combat while disguised. The trial, nevertheless, established an important precedent regarding the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for deception was ruled a legitimate ruse de guerre, provided combatants removed the disguises before engaging in combat. This distinction, fine as it was, would influence the interpretation of international law for decades. Skorzeny did not remain in custody long. In 1948, he escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt. Former SS officers, disguised as American military police, facilitated his escape. Some historians speculate that American intelligence may have tacitly allowed or even assisted the escape, though no concrete evidence has ever confirmed this intriguing theory. Skorzeny spent time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then in Salzburg and Paris, eventually settling in Spain, a haven for many ex-Nazis. He worked as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, a life strangely befitting a man who thrived on intrigue. Otto Skorzeny died of cancer on July 5, 1975, in Madrid at the age of 67. He never expressed regret for Operation Greif or any other wartime actions. The checkpoint interrogations, however, endured as a unique and memorable part of American military folklore. The questions about baseball and Hollywood, state capitals and movie stars became symbols of how cultural identity could serve as an unexpected yet powerful security tool during a crisis. The improvised system, however chaotic and absurd it sometimes appeared, proved astonishingly effective at exposing infiltrators whose language training, no matter how rigorous, simply could not replicate the casual, ingrained cultural knowledge that Americans absorbed naturally from childhood. Being American, it turned out, involved far more than merely speaking English or wearing the right uniform. It involved a tapestry of shared cultural experiences, common references, collective memories, a deeply woven identity that could not be adequately taught to foreigners in weeks of intensive training. This cultural cohesion, often taken for granted in peacetime, proved to be a critical national security asset when tested by enemy infiltrators. The 17 men executed for Operation Greif are remembered today primarily through military cemeteries and the dusty pages of historical accounts. Their graves at Lommel are maintained with the same care as those of soldiers who died in conventional combat. The cemetery makes no distinction between those executed as spies and those killed in battle. All are German war dead. Manfred Peruz was 23 years old at his execution. Günther Billing, 21, remained a convinced Nazi to his final moment, defiant to the end. Wilhelm Schmidt, 24, faced death with quiet resignation. Each was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother. Each had made choices that led them to that frozen morning in Belgium, to those posts, to those blindfolds, to those rifles. Operation Greif's legacy extended far beyond its tactical failure. The operation starkly demonstrated that special operations, no matter how audacious or cleverly conceived, cannot compensate for conventional military failure. Skorzeny's infiltrators could not capture bridges if Piper's panzers never reached them. No amount of deception and confusion could substitute for the decisive breakthrough that never occurred. Yet, ironically, the operation succeeded in creating disruption far exceeding what the actual infiltrators physically accomplished. The mere possibility of infiltration, the unsettling thought that an enemy might be a step behind you, wearing your uniform, speaking your language, created a wave of panic that affected hundreds of thousands of soldiers and fundamentally altered the operational tempo of the battle. This stark gap between perception and reality became a key lesson in modern strategic thinking about psychological warfare. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945. Allied forces resumed their relentless advance toward Germany. Within 4 months, the Third Reich collapsed. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed Operation Greif participants were already in their graves. Their war had ended violently on Belgian soil far from home. Their operation had failed in its tactical objectives, but it succeeded in creating confusion and fear that significantly hampered Allied operations during the critical opening phase of the battle. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, speaking to Parliament on January 18, 1945, while the battle still raged, declared it undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory. Churchill explicitly noted that Americans had engaged 30 to 40 men for every British soldier engaged, emphasizing that this was fundamentally an American battle and an American victory. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball did not know they were creating military folklore or contributing to a profound lesson in cultural identity. They were simply solving an immediate, pressing problem, improvising security measures to identify potential enemies. Their solution worked precisely because it was rooted in genuine shared culture. Americans knew about baseball and Hollywood and state capitals because they grew up American, absorbing that knowledge naturally, intuitively. Germans trying to impersonate Americans could meticulously study facts, but they could not replicate that natural cultural fluency, that ingrained understanding. This fundamental distinction between learned facts and absorbed culture proved decisive. The German failure demonstrated a principle that remains profoundly relevant today. Cultural knowledge, absorbed through lived experience over years, cannot be quickly taught to adults from different backgrounds, no matter how intelligent or dedicated they may be. Modern special operations forces and intelligence services have learned invaluable lessons from Operation Greif's mixed results. Today, intelligence services spend years preparing deep cover agents precisely because cultural fluency cannot be quickly taught. Language training, factual knowledge, and behavioral coaching are necessary, but they are insufficient. Genuine cultural fluency requires immersion, time, and the subtle, intangible experience of belonging. The fundamental challenge persists across decades. Culture is absorbed through experience, not merely taught in classrooms. Operation Greif demonstrated both the immense potential and the inherent limits of special operations. Small units conducting unconventional operations can indeed create disruption far beyond their numbers. The psychological impact can exceed tactical results by orders of magnitude. But without conventional military success providing the necessary conditions, special operations alone cannot achieve strategic objectives. Deception, however brilliant, cannot substitute for victory. For historians and military strategists, Operation Greif remains a compelling case study. It exemplifies how ambitious planning, when tragically disconnected from a realistic assessment of capabilities and resources, almost inevitably leads to failure. Hitler's late-war decision-making, increasingly detached from reality, frequently followed this pattern. Grandiose in conception, inadequate in resources, divorced from operational reality. Yet, the operation's unintended success in creating widespread panic paradoxically validated the concept that psychological warfare and deception can be powerful force multipliers, amplifying the effect of military action far beyond simple arithmetic. The 17 men who died before firing squads for wearing enemy uniforms would be largely forgotten if not for the historical record that preserves their stories. They were not, by most measures, particularly important men. They accomplished little before their capture. Their operation failed comprehensively in its tactical goals. Yet their executions marked an important moment in military and legal history, clarifying the application of international law regarding the use of enemy uniforms in warfare. The legacy of Operation Greif lives in the lessons it taught us, lessons that resonate to this day. Identity verification remains crucial for security in a world increasingly grappling with deepfakes and misinformation. Cultural knowledge remains extraordinarily difficult for outsiders to fake quickly or convincingly. Special operations remain valuable, but they are tools to support, not substitute for, conventional military success. The laws of war remain important, but are subject to complex interpretation based on circumstances and evidence, a constant ethical tightrope walk. And the human cost of war, a price we so often quantify in battlefield casualties, extends beyond those killed in combat to include those executed after capture for violations of the laws of war. Each execution represented a human being with a family, a history, and unrealized potential, whose life was ended by bullets fired on legal authority after what were deemed proper trials under wartime conditions. The graves at Lommelmark lives cut short by war and its brutal, often unforgiving logic. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball were simply American soldiers who followed orders, but they also carried the profound psychological burdens from executing prisoners, even enemies convicted of espionage. Operation Greif failed to capture a single bridge. It caused no major destruction. It killed relatively few Americans directly. But the pervasive fear it created, the insidious doubt it sowed, delayed reinforcements, disrupted command decisions, and consumed vital resources during critical days of the Battle of the Bulge. The indirect impact, impossible to quantify precisely, undeniably shaped the battle's opening phase. The infiltrators being caught, tried, and executed within days demonstrated American military justice operating under immense wartime pressure. The speed from capture to execution reflected the urgency of combat conditions and established a precedent, though modern standards would certainly require more deliberate proceedings. The Battle of the Bulge ground on for 5 more weeks after the infiltrators were executed, ultimately resulting in German defeat and the irreversible elimination of Germany's strategic reserve. The story of Operation Greif and its intertwining with the Battle of the Bulge reminds us that warfare encompasses far more than just battlefield operations. Psychological impact, cultural factors, and the perception of threat often matter as much, if not more, than tactical results. A failed operation that creates widespread panic may, in fact, achieve more strategic disruption than a successful operation that remains undetected. The checkpoint interrogations, absurd as they sometimes seemed, worked because they tested a depth of knowledge that genuine Americans possessed naturally, a fluency infiltrators simply could not replicate despite their training. The American soldiers who fought in the Battle of the Bulge faced not only a powerful enemy offensive, but also the insidious psychological burden of suspecting that enemies might be anywhere, wearing any uniform, speaking any language. This erosion of certainty, this profound challenge to trust, marked a new dimension in warfare, one that would influence military operations, security procedures, and our understanding of identity itself for generations to come. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, but the silent, unseen enemy that sows doubt in the minds of men.